Welcome to Do It in Durham 2021. Now in its 9th year, Do It in Durham is an event series that takes place during Global Entrepreneurship Week. It is Durham Region's own forum to celebrate, inspire, and support entrepreneurship. Stay tuned as we bring on our presenter.
Well, I'm Allison Brown. I'm the Agriculture Economic Development Specialist with Invest Durham, and I'm happy to be moderating today's webinar. So to give a quick overview of Invest Durham, for those who may not be familiar with us, our role is to provide economic development support for all of Durham region. Our team has staff that specialize in many areas, including tourism, rural and agriculture development, investment attraction, and marketing and cluster development. We are here to support our local business community and grow our economy. We are happy to work with our partners and share resources with the business community, including those who are looking to start a business in Durham region. And we are happy to be partnering today with BACD, the Business Advisory Center Durham, to deliver this workshop. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ashley with BACD to provide some welcoming remarks.
Thank you so much, Allison, for having us today and for being here today. As many of you know, it is Do It in Durham Week. So it takes place during Global Entrepreneurship Week and is Durham Region's own forum to celebrate, inspire, and support entrepreneurship. And we are in our 9th year of doing this wonderful celebration. This year, 2021, our theme is riding the waves. So just like in surfing, businesses need to be able to ride the waves, fight the sharks, and find the perfect wave. This event series is a collaboration of organizations and resources for businesses in Durham region in partnership with business owners and entrepreneurs sharing their expertise. I do want to take some time just to say thank you to our 2021 sponsors and community partners. Without their help and support, we wouldn't be able to do this without them. And thank you for sharing this event series amongst your network as well. And with that, I will hand it over to back to Allison or our speakers today.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, so let's get started. So today we're going to learn some steps involved and tips from a health perspective for starting a home-based food business from our health experts. We will start with a presentation from Carrie Waring with the Ontario Ministry of Health, followed by a presentation from Rachel MacArthur with the Durham Region Health Department. We would like this session to be as interactive as possible, so we're going to leave some time for questions at the end. So Carrie and Rachel, they'll give their presentations, and then following, you'll be given the opportunity to put your questions in the chat, and we will moderate those and get them answered. So we will kick off today's session by introducing you to our first presenter, Carrie Waring. So Carrie holds a health sciences bachelor degrees with an honor specialization, as well as a master's in geography from Western University. She has also completed Ryerson's Public Health and Occupational Safety degree with a certification as a public health inspector in 2010. Prior to joining the Ministry of Health, Carrie practiced as a public health inspector at the Middlesex London Health Unit for 8 years. There, she specialized in food safety, recreational water, and health hazard investigations. Carrie is a current acting manager at the Ministry of Health within the Environmental Policy and Programs Unit under the Office of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, the Public Health Division. So with that, I am very happy to pass the floor over to Carrie, and she'll give us a presentation. So I'll just load up her slides here.
Thank you, Allison, for that introduction. And, thank you to all for having me join you today. I'm very much looking forward to the session and the discussion. All right, so food safety, a guide to starting a home-based food business with a particular focus on low-risk foods. So I will begin the presentation just to review the relevant legislation and regulations that may apply to food premises and food businesses. And then I'll move on to the development of the guide for starting a home-based food business. So each province has its own public health acts and regulations. So here in Ontario, we have the Health Protection and Promotion Act, which we call the HPPA, and it sets out the mandate to make regulations, also help to inform programs and protocols which govern food premises. All local public health units are responsible for the conditions of food safety as it applies to food that is held, prepared, and served to the public. These responsibilities are also to the food premises owners and operators and employees. So the HPPA does provide specific powers to the medical officer of health and public health inspectors, which do include the power of entry. So the medical officer of health or public health inspector may enter any place of business during normal working hours without a warrant to carry out the duties under this act. So this would include routine inspections or the investigation of complaints or potential health hazards. Health inspectors also have the power of seizure. So under this, they may seize anything that's suspected of being a health hazard, and they may hold it or submit it for laboratory testing. Health inspectors also have the power of destruction. And this is where if a health inspector determines that there could be a health risk or a health hazard, they do have the power to destroy or dispose of any food immediately on site. And they also have the power to make an order. And these orders are issued if they're suspected to be a health hazard. And some of these orders do include the power to close a premise until that health hazard is corrected or rectified. So under the Health Protection and Promotion Act, we define a food premises as a premises where food or milk is manufactured, processed, prepared, stored, handled, displayed, distributed, transported, sold, or offered for sale, but does not include a room actually used as a dwelling in a private residence. So what this means is that for food premises that are operated in a private residence, they would be subject to inspection by the local public health inspectors. Only rooms that are used as a dwelling cannot be inspected as a food premises. So that may mean any areas that are operated for the purposes of your business would be subject to inspection. So under the food premises regulation, this sets out the requirements for all food premises and is directed towards the owners and operators of those businesses. Some of the key requirements under the food premises regulation include, but are not limited to, ensuring that potentially hazardous foods are maintained at required temperatures, that food is protected from contamination and adulteration, that food contact surfaces can be readily cleaned and sanitized, ensuring good personal hygiene is practiced, cleaning and sanitizing multi-service utensils to prevent harmful bacteria from spreading, ensuring that owners and operators are maintaining the food premises in a good, readily cleanable and clean and in good repair condition, and ensuring the presence of a trained food handler, and they may also be subject to posting the results of inspection subject to the public health unit's policies and protocols. We also want to acknowledge that each municipality will have their own bylaws governing their own jurisdiction. So municipalities have the power to create bylaws to address areas of oversight that are not dealt with at the provincial or federal level. So some of these bylaws can be different in each municipality as each area has its unique context and considerations. Generally speaking, some bylaws that may be applicable to food premises would cover areas such as licensing, garbage control, sewage disposal, building standards, and zoning. So one of the key aspects of the food safety program is to prevent foodborne illness. Generally speaking, there are 4 causes of foodborne illness to consider. That would include chemical contamination, physical contamination, allergens, and microbiological contamination. So foodborne illness from contaminated food can contaminated by bacteria, viruses, or parasites would be considered microbiological. And then bacterial illnesses tend to be the most common type of foodborne illness here in Ontario. Keeping in mind that each reported case of foodborne illness may actually have hundreds of unreported cases of illness spread within the community. So for example, when people say they have the 24-hour flu or flu bug, oftentimes it could be a case of foodborne illness. So some symptoms would include stomach cramps, diarrhea, vomiting, nausea, and fever. Taking a closer look at the food safety landscape in Ontario, we believe that an estimated 100,000 cases of foodborne illness occur in Ontario each year due to the top reportable pathogens. We also know that foodborne illness can result in serious long-term health outcomes. So to reduce the risk of foodborne illness at a food premises, we have ensured that food premises are routinely inspected by public health inspectors. So generally speaking, Ontario has approximately 78,000 food premises. Public health inspectors have conducted approximately 153,800 routine and complaint-based inspections to ensure the public has access to safe food every year. Public health inspectors have a certificate in public health inspection, and it's granted by the Canadian Institute of Public Health Inspectors to those candidates who fulfill the requirements that are set forth in the regulations respecting the certificate in Public Health Inspection Canada. Just a bit more on public health inspectors. So certified public health inspectors, or PHIs, enforce both the Health Protection and Promotion Act and the Food Premises Regulation through routine compliance inspections of all food premises. During inspections, public health inspectors may look for unsafe food handling practices, issues of non-compliance with the regulations. They also investigate foodborne illnesses and foodborne outbreaks. They can investigate consumer complaints, and of course, would provide direction with regards to food recalls and emergency situations such as fires and floods or loss of electricity. Another job of a public health inspector is to conduct an annual risk assessment upon the first inspection each year. This risk assessment would determine if a premise is considered low, high, or moderate risk, and that translates to the number of inspections that may be required at that particular food premise each year. And that range can be from 3 inspections, 2 inspections, or 1 inspection per year. This is just a bit of a visual graphic of some of the legislation here in Ontario. So you'll see in the green box, the Ministry of Health can set forth regulations under the Health Protection and Promotion Act, of which we currently have the Food Premises Regulation. The Ministry of Health can also enact program standards for the provision of services and accountability that are offered by the public health units. So those are the blue boxes to the right. So the ministry will set forth standards, protocols, and guidelines that would ensure some consistency across the public health units for how the food safety program is delivered. So some of those key aspects would be ensuring that inventories of food premises are maintained, guidance for how the inspection frequency is determined, how to support food recalls. We do ask that health units provide inspection summaries on their website, and that they should ensure that there is food handler training programs offered in their areas. Under the operational approaches for food safety guideline, these are further guidance provided to the health units with respect to areas of food handler training, how to conduct risk assessments, support for food recalls, guidance for farmers markets and special events. The last, column here at the very bottom, which might be hard to see, is our development of Ministry of Health resources that we call reference documents. And these reference documents are targeted to both food premises owners and operators and for reference by the public health units. And I'll get into a little bit more detail later in the presentation of what may be available to you. Great. So when it comes to starting a home-based food business, with the consideration of low-risk foods, so we do at the provincial level permit food to be sold within a private residence under the HPPA and food premises regulation. Home-based food businesses that prepare only low-risk foods may also be exempt from certain sections of the food premises regulation. These were enacted in January 2020, and the aim was to make it easier for individuals and businesses to sell low-risk foods. So with respect to what a low-risk food is defined as, in the regulation, we do define it as a food that is not potentially hazardous, meaning that it doesn't require time and temperature control for the safety of the food. So some examples of low-risk foods could include most breads and buns, other types of baked goods, chocolate, hard candies and brittles, fudge toffees, granola, trail mix, nuts and seeds, and some cakes, brownies, muffins, and cookies. Though just to caution that there are some types of icing and fillings that could be required to be temperature controlled depending on, I guess, the ingredients that are used. We also want to keep in mind that despite a food being categorized as low risk, it doesn't mean that it's free of risk. So we do know that some low risk foods, such as peanut butter, some fresh fruits and vegetables, can become contaminated if there is mishandling during the production. Therefore, it's always important to follow safe food handling practices. So when it comes to the exemptions specific to low risk food, I do lay them out here, and it is a bit of legal jargon, but we did remove certain provisions with regard to specified hand washing stations used only by employees, dishwashing equipment, and food handler training. To put it simply, we did hear from many stakeholders that the number of required sinks, the combination of which being for dishwashing and for hand washing, would be very difficult to implement in some home-based businesses or small businesses. So while we are removing some of these requirements from the regulation, there still is an expectation that, of course, hands would be washed before handling any food, that dishes and utensils are washed and sanitized in accordance with the regulation. And we do, of course, recommend food handler training. But what this means is that there is some flexibility, a little bit of give that you can consider when opening up a business. And it may depend on your specific context and what you have available. And of course, we do encourage that discussion with your local public health unit to determine what you may need for your business. Next slide. So again, we do recommend some best practices despite some of these regulatory exemptions. So there still is a requirement to wash your hands prior to handling any food item, and that we do recommend that hand washing is conducted in a sink separate from your dishwashing sinks, and ensuring that your sink is equipped with liquid soap and paper towel or an air dryer. When it comes to dishwashing equipment, we did remove the provision to have a commercial dishwasher, but that being said, you may use a domestic dishwasher or a 2 or 3 compartment sink method. And if the adequate number of sinks are not available, then you may discuss with your health inspector whether or not it would make sense to use bins to support sanitizing of the utensils, depending on your setup. And of course, when it comes to food handler training, It may not be required if you are preparing low-risk foods, but we do believe that it is very important to be aware of safe food handling practices. And if you are working with any staff or employees, that they are trained in food safety knowledge as well. So when it comes to starting a home-based food business, and this is based on guidance developed by the Ministry of Health, we would first ask you to decide what type of food you would like to sell, whether you want to focus on low-risk food, or if you would like to do potentially hazardous food items. Next, we would recommend that you contact your local public health unit to discuss your food business model and what you intend to prepare. And they should be able to help you with food safety advice. They may also let you know whether or not there could be applicable local municipal bylaws with regard to licensing, zoning, or other considerations that you might need to consider prior to opening your business. We would also recommend that you review the public health requirements, the regulations, and the Health Protection and Promotion Act, so that you ensure that you are meeting all of the requirements. And as I said, some of those home-based businesses that sell low-risk foods may be exempt from some of the requirements, but the rest would still apply. And then moving forward to opening your business, that would be in partnership again with your local public health unit. And then there's always that caveat to ensure that you also meet the requirements for any local municipal bylaws. So just to round off the end of the presentation, here are some resources that you may find helpful. We do list here both the HPPA and the food premises regulation. The food premises reference document is basically a sister document to the regulation. So it outlines all of the regulatory requirements, and it does provide some best practices and advice to meet those requirements. We have also developed a reference document for safe food donation and its sister document, the supplemental materials guide. And you might find some interesting information here as well that pertains to allergens, food labeling, and a little bit more of an explanation of those exemptions to the regulation if you're preparing low-risk food. The Ontario government also has a small business access website that could provide you with some information on potential funding and as well as business and legal support. And of course, if you do have any specific questions about the food premises regulation and how that might apply in your region, we would encourage you to talk to your local public health unit. And that is all from me, and thank you so much for joining. I'll be happy to take questions, I guess, at the end of the session.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Carrie. We really appreciate your presentation and giving us a look into the regulations required from a provincial level, as well as some resources for those who would want to look a bit further into it. So that's great. And with that, I'll just remind everyone, you're more than welcome to put any questions you have in the chat. It doesn't matter if it's during the presentation or not, and we will moderate those following our next presentation. So with that, I would like to introduce everyone to Rachel MacArthur. So Rachel, she is a graduate from the University of Guelph and Ryerson University with degrees in biological sciences and public health and safety. She began her career at the Durham Region Health Department as a student public health inspector in May 2009 and became a full-time permanent inspector in December of that year. For 11 years, Rachel has worked in the field inspecting food premises, personal service settings, public pools, licensed child care centers, and investigating animal bites for rabies and health hazards within the community. Rachel has become the Food Safety Senior Inspector in February 2020. So I'm very pleased to pass the floor over to Rachel, and she'll give us a presentation. So thank you, Rachel.
Perfect. Thank you, Allison. I'm assuming that you all can see my screen here. Are we good? Yes. Okay, perfect. So thank you for having me here. I just want to also let you know my colleague Fiona Lau is also here, who has helped me put together this presentation for you today. So I think some of this might be a little overlapped with Carrie's presentation, but I guess we can just kind of review briefly. Since the ministry has put out their guide for home-based food businesses earlier this year, we have seen a substantial increase in home-based food premises, actually. I think also mixed in with COVID, obviously, people find working at home works better, and that they can move their business to their home and continue doing what they're doing, maybe in their commercial storefront. So we have seen a dramatic increase in them, keeping our inspectors very busy here. So as Carrie had already mentioned, our powers all come under the Health Protection and Promotion Act, which we call the HPPA. So we do have the authority to inspect all food premises in Durham region, and this includes home-based food premises. I want to make note that we do not need to schedule our inspections, even at a home-based. So what we typically do ask is for you as a home-based operator to provide us with, a couple of days of hours of operation, or times you most likely will be home, so that if we do just stop by, the chances are higher that we'll run into you. Sometimes we do obviously schedule inspections. It's just the way it has to kind of go, but we prefer not to, as it's not fair for the commercial storefront who has unscheduled inspections for you to have scheduled inspections. So we try to make it as fair as possible, obviously, and stick with the same procedures throughout. So we also have the power to seize food and equipment, like Carrie had mentioned. We can seize it right there on the spot if we determine it's a health hazard. Typically, it would be for, let's say, temperature abuse food, or it could be for uninspected food as well, so like uninspected meat that we find at a food premise. And then the equipment typically is damaged equipment. So if it's like a spatula that's broken or a knife that's been chipped. So we don't want you to continue to use that equipment where it could become a physical contaminant to the food. We also can do legal action under the HPPA. So the main ones are orders and charges. So what the public health inspectors issue would be a Section 13 order. And we do issue a lot of these for home-based businesses. And those are the ones that we receive a lot of complaints on uninspected home-based food businesses. And when we get those complaints, it will issue them a Section 13 order to stop their home-based food premise if they aren't equipped properly, or if they no longer want to operate. They just, they don't want them to be inspected by us. We'll issue them an order, let them know that they can't operate as we've agreed upon this, basically. So we typically do that for home-based when we get the complaints. If you want to open, you won't get a Section 13 order because we'll just work with you to get in compliance. And then also you can be charged under the HPPA, really under the food premises regulation for the most part. We only will charge people. It's basically a progressive enforcement model. So, you do basically have some warnings at first. If we aren't getting compliance from you, that's when we would proceed to charges. But it's kind of a last case scenario. And what our public health inspectors enforce and what you would need to know if you're opening a home-based food premise are basically the food premise regulation, which Carrie has also already mentioned to you. The next piece of legislation here in Durham that you would have to adhere to is our Dine Safe Durham bylaw. So all home-based food premises will also fall under this Dine Safe Durham bylaw. So what that means is that you'll have, when you're inspected and your inspection is completed, you will get a colored sign and your inspection reports will be disclosed online. This also includes any legal action that has occurred to your business as well. That legal action stays up on our website for 2 years. Under the bylaw as well, you have to keep your latest copy of your compliance inspection on site. So if somebody's picking up food from your house and they ask to see your latest inspection report, by law, you must show them that inspection report. The difference between the paper copy you're given from our staff versus the one online is that the one online is like generic computer generated comments. The one that's given to you by the staff has additional comments where they have typed in. So it has just a little more thorough. You don't have to actually post one of these signs at your door front, but what's required is that you have it with you. So, you know, a lot of times when I was out there, I would recommend when someone's picking up an order, maybe you put your Dine Safe sign out there. If you're advertising via social media or somewhere, you could show that you're Dine Safe certified. And if you're out and about, let's say you go to another jurisdiction especially, it might be good to bring that sign with you, because if you're making, let's say, canned goods and you're selling them at some sort of other market outside Durham, that health unit might ask you, are you inspected? And then you could show them your Dine Safe sign. So it's kind of good to carry it with you. The one thing that I want to note as well is that your home address will actually appear on our Dine Safe disclosure website. It doesn't say you're a home-based food premise, but it is the address of your business, and therefore that's the address that will be online. Some premises that are exempt from Dine Safe and posting of the signs are special events, farmers markets, private residential functions. So if you have, you know, a party at your house, and farm gate sales as well. And I just put the link in there as well to our Dine Safe website where you can view all this information. So like Carrie said, there is an annual risk assessment that our staff will do on your food premise every year. So it happens before your first inspection of the year, and it determines your risk level for that year and how many times you will be inspected. So if you do get categorized as a high risk, you'll have at least one inspection every 4 months. A moderate risk is at least one inspection every 6 months. A low risk is at least one inspection every 12 months. And we call them super lows. And what that means in Durham is that basically you sell prepackaged non-hazardous foods only. You'll have one inspection every 24 months. These number of inspections do not include re-inspections or complaint investigations or inspections. That's just your compliance, how frequently you would be inspected for a compliance inspection. Some of the things that would determine your risk would be the type of food you're serving, your compliance history with us as well, and whether or not you have a certified food handler on site. So now I'm briefly going to go over the steps for opening a home-based food premise here in Durham region. So your first step would be to determine what food products you want to make and sell. Your second step is to contact your local municipality and fire department to ensure your home is suitable for a home-based food premise. To my knowledge, there's no bylaw anymore within Durham region that prohibits a home-based food premise from our local municipalities. But every municipality has their own rules. So some municipalities may require you to get a license. Some may require an inspection by their bylaw officer. Some may require, like I know that some have certain requirements as to your business has to all be on the same floor, or your business can't be in the basement. So there are some restrictions. So it's always good to talk it through with your municipality first, the building department, to make sure that you're in line there, and also fire to make sure that the food you're preparing in your food premise are suitable for your, because it's typically just a domestic stove that you have, an oven. Then you're going to review the requirements in Durham Region Health Department's home-based food premise document and all applicable legislation. So this document is actually a new document we just created probably within the last 6 months. Reason being, like I said earlier, we have had substantial increase in home-based food premises, and we want to have the information clearly outlined for you so you know what's expected. So we will get into this more in detail in a couple slides. Your fourth step will be to complete our food premise questionnaire. This is a picture of it right here. This questionnaire has to be completed by anyone who wants to open a food premise in Durham region. So on here too, it will talk about the types of food you want to do. It'll have talk about, so it has type of menu. So that's why we said it's important to determine that at the very beginning, because that's going to also determine what certain requirements you're going to need in your home-based food premise. And then you need to complete this and submit it to the Durham Region Health Department at least 14 days in advance of opening. So we have had some people try and submit it like 2 days before they want to open, and we just don't have enough staff to get out there that quickly, and it's going to delay your process. And also, there might be other things that we uncover from this questionnaire that you need to do prior to opening. So the sooner you can get this into us, the better. Once this is handed into us, it does get sorted out to whoever our area public health inspector is, and then they'll be in contact with you. Then you want to make sure that once you've reviewed this with your public health inspector and everything seems to be okay, and you're looking at setting up a pre-operational inspection is what we call them, you want to ensure that all your equipment is operational prior to your first inspection with our public health inspector. So have everything on site, everything working. And then they'll come take a visit so that way they can test everything and make sure everything's functional. Once that's completed and you've had your inspection and you get your green dine safe sign, your home-based food premise will be opened and it will be inspected based on that annual risk assessment. It's important to note too that once that inspection frequencies like determined and the inspector comes for their next inspection, you do have to let them in to inspect your food premise. So like Carrie had said, a home-based food premise isn't exempt from it, and you have to allow our staff to come in and inspect the area where your home-based food premise is, not the rest of your dwelling like she had mentioned, but you have to let us do that, okay, and work with us. Failure to do so, we do have to obviously escalate things, and we have had a few scenarios where that's happened, but generally speaking, our home-based food premise operators are fantastic to work with. So now we're going to get into our home-based food premise document. So it is actually a resource on our website, and it's a PDF one-page resource. And it basically splits it up into the two categories. So you have your low-risk foods and then your high and moderate risk foods and what's required under both. So for your low-risk foods, as Carrie had mentioned, these types of foods present a low risk of foodborne illness and do not require refrigeration. So to refresh your memories, examples include cookies, muffins, breads, brownies, trail mix, etc. So it's not a finite list at all, but it's just a few examples so that you guys can understand what a low risk food is and if your food would fall under that. So some of the requirements is that a designated hand washing sink is not required, but hand washing is still mandatory. So you could use your two compartment sink. I think typically kitchens have a 2-compartment sink in their kitchen or a 1-compartment. You could use that for hand washing, and then you could use it for dishwashing. So we do not encourage or really want to see the washroom sink used for hand washing here in Durham, as we don't allow any of our commercial operators to do so. It's kind of, that's where you go to the washroom, you want it separate from the kitchen, and all kitchens have at least one sink. So we would like you washing your hands in that kitchen sink. And then your hand washing sinks must be equipped with liquid soap, paper towels, and hot and cold running water. So we don't want to see you guys using your tea cloths or a hand towel when you're preparing foods for the business. We want to see paper towels. And then once again, you don't need a 2-compartment sink necessarily for your low risk foods, but your dishes still need to be cleaned and sanitized. So we have had a few home-based food premises that have one of those big farm sinks. So what they could do if they're preparing low risk foods is they could wash their dishes in that one sink and then have a large bin beside the sink where they're going to sanitize their dishes. So they could use a bin on top of that one sink. Another thing is that you could also use your domestic dishwashers when you prepare low risk foods for the public. You must also have an approved sanitizer on site, so such as chlorine, quaternary ammonium, and iodine. Other sanitizers can be approved by the health department. And if they are approved, you just need to make sure that you have the little test strips available for that sanitizer. Also, for your home-based food premise, you want to make sure that all food and equipment used for the business are stored separately from personal items. And we would like to see them labeled in a separate bin and area. That way, when our inspectors come, they know exactly what's used for the business and what's used for personal. All temperature-controlled units must be equipped with a working thermometer. You need to have adequate garbage disposal and removal. You need to also ensure that all foods from an inspected or approved source. So for example, eggs, let's say in this case, because eggs are typically used in baking, you want to make sure you're using grade A eggs. We do not want you using any of the farm gate eggs. Those could be used for personal consumption, but not for your business. And then businesses that are on private water, you need to make sure that you have a safe and potable water supply. So if you're on well water, our staff will always take a water sample prior to you opening and during every compliance inspection as well. So you'll need to make sure it comes back so there's no E. coli in your water. Municipal water, it's not a problem. And then if you're on private sewage, there'll be further consultation with our sewage system inspector. So that could delay your process further as well, because they have to make sure that your sewage system is equipped for the business operations. This isn't like the finite list from the food premise regulation, but we kind of highlighted the high level things. And a lot of the questions that we get coming into our phone line, we try to answer here. So then you have your high and moderate risk foods. So these types of food can support the growth of bacteria and need to be cooked to a high enough temperature for long enough time and or stored in the fridge or freezer. So examples include meats, dairy products. So that could be even cream pies, for example, or quiches, seafood, eggs, cooked rice, cooked potatoes or pasta, etc. So in these situations, you are required to have a designated hand washing sink in the food preparation area. So what that means is you need to have a sink that is solely used for hand washing. The washroom, laundry, and a portable hand washing sink are not acceptable alternatives here in Durham region. So that designated hand washing sink must be equipped with liquid soap, paper towels, and hot and cold running water, as discussed previously. And you also must have a proper dishwashing equipment set up in your home. So you must have a 2 or 3 compartment sink or a commercial or industrial dishwasher on site to clean and sanitize dishes. A domestic dishwasher is unacceptable for high and moderate risk foods. Something to keep in mind is at the health department level, we don't mind that if you have, let's say you have 2 compartment sink upstairs and that's going to be your designated hand washing sink. And then you put a commercial dishwasher down in your basement. The health department is fine with that, but these are also questions you would have to ask your municipality to make sure that it follows all their bylaws and building codes or licensing. Because I know we have run into that before where one of the municipalities wanted it all on the same level. So that's why we have to make sure that they're okay with it first. And then the same things as I had mentioned before. So all your food and equipment stored separately from personal items, thermometers in your coolers, garbage disposal needs to be adequate, your food from inspected sources. So all your meat has to be inspected meat. And in this situation too, it's mandatory to have a food handler certification at all times that food is being prepared. So somebody has to have their food handler training. And then you also need a safe and potable water supply, and it would also get passed off to our sewage system inspector if you're on private sewage as well. So it's a little more complicated when you want to prepare high and moderate risk foods. I have a list of resources here, and they all link exactly to the documents. So I've laid them all out here. One thing I'd like to note, actually I'll take you to our food safety website very quickly here. If this works, just to show you where all this information is. So if you go to Durham Region's food safety website and you go down to the bottom, you have to scroll down a bit. There is this new section we created this year as well, how to start a home-based food premise. So it walks you through the steps that I've already discussed and has links to our home-based food premise document, the food premises regulation, the HPPA, our food premise questionnaire. And then we also created just recently a home canning document. There's been a lot of home canning that's been happening, and it's a little more complicated, specifically depending on what kind of food you're doing. So it does go in depth on what's required. And one of the take homes from this, and one thing that we really stress, is to try and use it's called a validated recipe. That means that it's been tested to be a safe recipe in the end if you follow it exactly as outlined. So examples right here, it talks about the National Center for Home Food Preservation, Ball Corporation, and Bernardin are all validated recipe websites where you could use their wet recipes. Using an old family recipe and selling to the public can be dangerous and has led to outbreaks in the past. So I'm not going to go through this right now, but I just wanted to draw your attention to that, and that's an additional resource for you as well. And that's everything from me. So I'll just put it back over to Allison, and then we can, I guess, get some questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rachel. I appreciate you going over all of the in-depth details and steps and resources available to those looking to start a home-based food business. So that's very much appreciated. So now that we've heard from both of our presenters, I'd like to open up the floor to a Q&A section. So this is a great opportunity to ask questions of our public health experts since they're both here. So I'll just start by reading through some questions in the chat. So we've got one of the first ones that came in, and it's asking about bylaws and laws. And does a person have to individually seek these out and get help, or is there a one-stop shop to getting the information required?
I guess I can speak to that. So it's a little complicated because there's a lot of different municipalities within Durham region. So I think we have, 7 maybe. So at the health department, we don't know each bylaw and their property standards, and do they license, do they not for home-based food premises. So that's why we always say to start, when you're thinking of doing this, determine the food products first, and then call your municipality and see what's required from their end, because we don't want to hold you up any further. Once you get to us, we want to make sure that you've reached out to the municipality, you're zoned properly, you're following all their bylaws, so they could provide you with that information. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, they don't have specific sections on like a resource or a fact sheet on home-based businesses. You have to read through their bylaws. So it's a lot of interpreting it. So I would start with probably just calling them or putting in a question to their like service desk about it and speaking with somebody, because it is a little confusing on that end. And then as far as the health department goes, I kind of showed you our section on the food safety website, and that would be your one-stop shop for us, where it has all the resources, how to apply to us, and everything for home-based food premise.
Perfect. Thank you, Rachel. And there's a few questions asking for copies of the presentation. I'll just confirm with Rachel and Carrie to double check they're all right with that being distributed, and then we'll work on that with BACD. And there's also a recording that will be available as well. It will be posted on the BACD YouTube channel, so you'll be able to check that out later as well. So for the next question for Carrie, is there a PDF guide with all this information, like the reference chart, low risk foods, and etc.?
Great, thanks. So I did include within the chat the link to the Ministry of Health guide for starting a home-based food business. I would certainly also recommend reviewing the Durham Public Health website, as there seems to be many more technical and specific resources. I think that would be very helpful.
Perfect. Thank you, Carrie. And another question that we've got here, should home-based food business operators also be taking food safety and food handling training? So I think Carrie might have touched on this a bit earlier, but I'll just get you to address that again.
Sure. So it is a requirement in the food premises regulation to ensure that there is a trained food handler supervisor or employee on staff during all operations of business. However, if you are focused on only preparing those low risk foods, then you may be applicable to the exception where that would not be required. So again, it really depends on the type of food that you are intending to prepare. And of course, again, validating that with your local public health unit But regardless, it is a very good practice to be informed of food safety knowledge.
Perfect. And I believe this next question will probably be for Rachel. But although the municipality would not have a bylaw against home-based food businesses, would there be zoning issues if it's in a residential area?
So I can't speak to that. That once again goes to bylaw. So that's why we say contact your local municipality. They might have zoning issues, especially with regards to traffic and other things that your home-based business might be bringing in. So that I can't speak to the zoning because that's not Durham Regional Health Department's jurisdiction.
Perfect, thank you. And the next question, how can we verify if someone catering has a permit?
So I can answer that. So we don't, like, I guess, dine safe sign. And so caterers are a little difficult. So if they have a home base, it's very easy. There are some caterers that just jump around from inspected kitchen to inspected kitchen, and they don't really, they kind of fall under the radar. So it's trying to find out how you inspect them. Do you inspect them from their home? Even if they aren't preparing anything at their home, they might be, you know, maybe they don't even store anything there. So typically speaking, we always tell people, you know, make sure that if you're having, let's say, a wedding and you're looking at caterers, you should ask them where's their inspection certificate, their sign or an inspection report, because there are some that unfortunately fall through the cracks because of that. We call them kind of like ghost kitchens, where they don't have a home base and they're going around and preparing foods, but they've never seen a public health inspector, and they might go from York region to Durham region to Toronto to, and it's very difficult. And it's a very confusing process from our end, as well as how to capture them and how that looks. But the ones, a lot do have home bases, and they, you know, they don't prepare a lot of their foods on home, they store on home, and we at least have an opportunity to go to their home and educate and inspect based off that. And I know we're working on coming up with some policies to how to capture these ones that kind of jump around so that they aren't missed and fall through the cracks. But we would always say ask them to show proof of that. And that way, you know that they've seen somebody and they're hopefully preparing safe food.
Great, thank you. And another question here, do private home businesses need to have treatment like UV or filtration on their water if they're not connected to municipal water?
So I'll say potentially. So under the food premise regulation, you have to have potable, safe water. The other piece I didn't really get into is a lot of home-based don't fall under this regulation. There is a small drinking water system regulation that our safe water inspectors enforce. And if you fall under that regulation, you may have to get UV or chlorine or other treatment and filtration. But typically home-based are just takeout so that our safe water team doesn't have to get involved. If people are dining in, absolutely they would get involved, or if you're offering your washrooms to be used, absolutely they would be. But once again, we would also pass that off to our safe water team. Just typically speaking, you don't fall under that. But let's say I got the water sample back and your water was bad, then at that point you might have to get UV treatment on your water.
Great. And next, similar to another question that was asked, as a consumer, how can we verify if home-based businesses is a proper facility? And then to build on that, they asked, should home-based businesses inform insurance companies and take a commercial insurance? I'm not sure if you know the answer to that one,
yeah.
But.
So we typically do talk to them a little bit about that. We say you might want to call your insurance company to let them know what you're doing. Let's say there's a fire and your house burns down. It was because of your home-based food premise. You may not be covered, right? So you always want to loop in your insurance company. I think that's a great idea. As far as verify if they're a proper facility, I would recommend going to our Dine Safe Durham website, and then you can see if they're inspected prior to purchasing their food.
Perfect. And then relating this all to COVID-19, is there a requirement to have a COVID plan for a food-based home business?
So all businesses have to. So even the food-based, we do talk when you open one. Our inspectors will talk to you about having a COVID safety plan. Obviously, it's going to be very minimal because it's probably just family members working the business. You don't have employees coming in, but you still need to have a safety plan as to how you're going to make sure everything's operating safely. And it'll probably just be really short. We do have resources on our website. We have a template for a COVID safety plan that you can just, it's fillable form and you can just fill it in right there. It will just probably be very brief.
Great, thank you. All right, and next, can you prepare food in a home-based business and serve at another location event?
Yes, so that's, we just want, so basically what these caterers or sometimes people rent out commercial kitchens for their business as well, which is also an option. You just need to be preparing food in an inspected facility. So if you prepare it at home and then you go sell it at a special event, that's absolutely allowed. That's why I was saying that it's always good to bring your sign or inspection report kind of with you wherever you're selling that, in case you do get questioned or the health department stopping by that event and they're questioning your canned goods or your baked goods. Then you have the report to show that you're inspected from your home.
Great, thank you. And it was mentioned that all food must be from an inspected and approved source. So how does one go about having imported food ingredients inspected and approved?
So that's out of our realm. I don't know if Carrie has anything further to comment, but I think that's more if it's coming, especially internationally, that's going to be CFIA. So that's a Canadian Food Inspection Agency that's going to have jurisdiction over that. So you should keep, basically what we look for is always having all your receipts. So keep all your receipts for the business in a file folder somewhere so that if we are questioning something that's come internationally, we would refer it off to our counterparts at the federal level for that. And then you have receipts to show proof of it.
Great, thank you. And is a home-based food business required to provide washroom access to guests?
So we don't look at that. So all the construction of washrooms falls to the Ontario Building Code. We just check that the washrooms are maintained in a sanitary manner and equipped with the proper supplies. So that would be a question you would ask when you reach out to municipality, you would ask them. I'm guessing not, because especially if you're strictly takeout, but that's a question for your municipality to ask.
Great, thank you. And another one here, in a home-based cooking class business, are they allowed for people to sit and dine in?
I would say if they want to, yeah, no, like a lot of them, like let's say above Loblaws or above superstores and stuff, they have their cooking classes and then you eat after. So they're inspected by us. So they would have to be inspected. Even if you're helping out with the cooking and preparing of it, you're members of the public and food's being prepared for members of the public. So it would fall under our inspection.
Great, thank you. And another question here that I just missed. How do you verify if a business is advertising halal, kosher, or otherwise, if the food is actually, I guess, processed in that way?
So once again, any advertising or I guess labeling of the food is out of our jurisdiction as well. So that falls to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So those are questions that you would take to them, and it's all labeling. So anything labeling wise will always go to them. So I can't speak to the advertising, unfortunately.
Perfect, that's all right. I'm just scanning here to see if I have missed any. Oh, here's one that just came in. If the food is home cooked, does the transportation company not have to be inspected as they will transport? Sorry, let me just read this again.
So they're saying the food transportation company, I'm assuming like Uber Eats and Skip the Dishes.
Okay.
Do they need to be inspected? Currently, they aren't. I'm not sure if Carrie can provide any insight on that because I know that they're getting bigger by the minute, but currently we do not inspect the transportation vehicles from those individuals.
Yes, Rachel's correct. Though I would say that if there is this potential health hazard, or intentional tampering with the food, that would certainly be investigated.
Perfect. Thank you, Rachel and Carrie. And I see we've hit the 1 o'clock mark. So to respect everyone's time, I think we better wrap it up there. But I would just like to send a special thanks to Carrie and Rachel for taking the time to deliver their presentations, inform us about the steps required to starting a home-based food business, and answering all these questions. We really appreciate that. And I'd also like to thank BACD, the Business Advisory Center Durham, for all of their hard work in organizing a series of webinars this week to support Global Entrepreneurship Week. It's great to have so many resources out there for our business community. So I'd just like to say thank you to all involved. So with that, I think we'll wrap up our session here today. As mentioned, there will be a recording, and we'll check in about sharing the presentations as well. But thank you again, everyone, for joining us and asking some really great questions. And I hope you all were able to take something from this event, because I know I sure did. So with that, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great weekend, and bye for now.
Thank you for being a guest in this presentation. If you would like to book an appointment with us here at the Business Advisory Center Durham, just follow the information right on the closing slide, and we look forward to seeing you.